Timmermans, Oude Gueuze.
Life is too short to be drinking shitty beer.
Welcome to another edition of Bands, Bikes and Booze Reviews. This is a long-awaited Belgian beer that I wanted to do. Now, this beer is a little bit different from other Belgian beers. The fact that it's, well, again, here is something that's a bit of a bone of contention with certain people in Belgium. How do you pronounce Gueuze or Gueuze? Well, I've just told you. If you're French, it's pronounced Gueuze. Or if you're French speaking, it's pronounced Gueuze. If you're Flemish or living in the Flemish Brabant, it's pronounced Gueuze. And I've had this debate with a couple of people, and they were basically saying it's called Gueuze and it can't be called anything else because true Gueuze should be brewed within 15 kilometres of Brussels. Brussels, if you don't know, is more or less a French-speaking part of Belgium. However, this is actually brewed in the Flemish Brabant, so there is a case for it being called Gueuze. Whatever you want to call it, personally, I couldn't give a fuck. But what I will say, if you're not a fan of sour beer, then switch off now, because this is as sour as it gets. And I want to tell you about the process in making this beer because it is really interesting. Now, I've reviewed a few Gueuzes on the channel before. For argument's sake, I'm going to call it Gueuze, but it should be recognised that it's called Gueuze as well. I got told off in Bruges for calling it Gueuze by a barman over there. I was asking for some, and I kept asking, I say, have you got any Gueuze? And he, what are you talking about, Gueuze? Never heard of it. He must have done, but he wanted me to pronounce it the Flemish way. It's the French and the Flemish speaking part. With some people, it's a bit of a bone of contention, but that's what he was getting at. And he told me it's pronounced Gueuze. There you go. Not my circus, not my monkeys. Argue it amongst yourselves. Anyway, it's a very interesting brewing process, and it incorporates something that's called wild fermentation. What is wild fermentation? Well, wild fermentation is basically the yeast that's in the air. And believe me, there is yeast in the air. Now, the Seine Valley, which is roughly around sort of 15 kilometres of Belgium, that's where the true Gueuze should be brewed. That is renowned for having some of the, how could you say, some of the best wild yeast. And it's a very interesting process because there are brewing type yeasts or strains of yeast that are used to feed on the sugars in the usual way that you would brew stuff. But there's also a technique that's used to allow these wild yeast or spontaneous yeast, sometimes it's called spontaneous fermentation, to feed on the sugars as well. So it's basically reserving some of the sugars for this wild yeast. Now, how do they do that? Because obviously the yeast they're using are going to feed on any available sugars whatsoever. So how do you section off a proportion of the sugars that are contained in the malt for this wild yeast? Well, it's brewed in quite a similar fashion to beer to start off with. However, with normal beer, when the boil has finished, you cool it down rapidly, because when you cool it down rapidly, it prevents infection and it prevents off flavours. Now, what they do with Gueuze is they put it into something called a cool ship, and they cool it down very, very gradually, overnight even. That's how long it takes. Now, what they do just before that, when the boil is taking place, they will take a proportion of the malt and what they will do, they will super boil that. When you say super boil, what does that mean? They heat it to a very, very high temperature, which means that the sugars aren't accessible to normal yeast that are used in the normal brewing process. Then afterwards, that's added back, and these yeasts that are already in there can't feed on these sugars, so they can't break them down because it's been boiled so much. There's a chemical reaction that doesn't allow them to feed on these sugars, basically. But what happens is, when they put them in these cool ships, which are basically, if you can imagine how can I put it, a very shallow hot tub, but a big hot tub, and it's either lined with copper or iron. Used to be wood years ago, but now it's copper or iron. And they usually have it at the top of the brewery, and they leave it up there, and the yeast in the air will feed on this section of the sugars that haven't been broken down by the yeast that was previously in the wort. So what you get there is you get these wild yeast, and they're producing their own specific type of chemical reactions, and this chemical reaction does produce some kinds of chemicals, if you like, and these chemicals have flavours. So this spontaneous fermentation that does happen, when they break these sugars down, they produce flavours, and these flavours are normally sour, and there's a range of flavours that it produces because of the range of chemicals that these yeast will produce. Now, one of them is vinegar. Now, if you've ever had an off pint, you'll know what that's like, and it can taste very vinegary. And in English beers and basically any top fermented beers, apart from Gueuze, that is undesirable. It's an off flavour, and it's one where you will hand the pint back and say, that's dog shit, I want something better. However, in Gueuze, that is desirable. It gives it its nice sour flavour. However, you don't want too much of it, otherwise you're going to be drinking a cup of vinegar. There are other chemicals, or chemical reactions, I should say, that produce flavours. One of the other flavours, or what it produces, is called lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is a sour flavour, but it's more in keeping with. Have you ever had sour milk? It sounds disgusting, but it's quite nice. Sour milk is probably a bit extreme. Probably natural yoghurt. Have you ever had that? That slightly sour taste off a yoghurt, that kind of flavour, which is quite nice, in my opinion. And there are other flavours as well, but they're all basically sour flavours. Some people say there's like a sherbet kind of sourness to it as well. Again, quite desirable as a flavour. However, in beer, it's very subjective. So basically what happens is, they brew this, and then once it's taken out of the cool ship, once it's cooled down, it's put into a wooden cask, and it's left to ferment there. And it's left to ferment there for 3 years, on average. And again, there is more things going on with the bacteria in there, and it produces all kinds of flavours. But the beauty of this beer, and hence the reason it is called Oude Gueuze, Old or Oude, if you're going to speak Flemish, Oude in Flemish means old, and there's a reason it's called old. And in my warped mind, it's very much in keeping with the old ale style of England that was around in the 1700s. And what that would be, in many cases, would be a blend, and it would be a blend of matured beer and fresh beer, and that's exactly what that is. This is made up of 2 parts matured beer that has been put in these wooden tanks, and 1 part fresh beer, and the result is this Gueuze, or Oude Gueuze. And it's unique because, as I say, the spontaneous fermentation, or the wild fermentation that happens there, is unique to the area, because there is a case for saying that Seine Valley has a unique strain of yeast in the air that produces this flavour. And Timmermans have been doing this for 300 years. They're the oldest, and it actually says it here, since 1702 they've been doing this. It's the world's oldest Lanbic brewery. Now, Lanbic is a style of Belgian beer, as I say. It's usually sour, but there are variations. You get Creek beer, which is my favourite Lanbic. It's made with Morello cherries, very nice indeed. There are a couple of really good examples of that. I do like the Bacchus stuff, which is brewed by, is it Bostiles? No, Bostiles is the older Creek. That's my favourite. That is a fantastic creek beer, one of my favourites. It's, again, a really old Lanbic brewer, but for me, they do some fantastic creek beers. And, well, the creek beer that they do, I think, is fantastic. And it's my favourite, the Oude Gueuze. I've reviewed it on the channel. It's fantastic. Or the Old Creek, I should say. I'm getting confused. Oude Creek. That is really worth checking out. I've only ever seen it in Belgium, and I had to bring it back from Belgium to review it. There are a couple of others that are around. They do a framboise, which I'm not really a fan of, to be honest. That's brewed with raspberries, and I don't really like it. To me, it tastes artificial. I have actually reviewed the Timmermans framboise. They used to sell that in Morrison's. Really not impressed with that. Didn't like that. Gave it a very low mark. I think I gave it 1 or 2 out of 10. It just tasted so artificial. It was sweet and it wasn't nice. The creek beer is nice though. Mark my words. If you can get hold of it, it's very nice indeed. And I have tried some other Gueuzes on here, but this is reputed to be one of the best. Now, again, I want to go back to the fermentation process on this, because it's a blend, and you have to remember that this beer has been brewed a few years ago. In fact, this was brewed in 2018, and it was bottled in 2021. So it's 3 years in the making, and to be honest, that's a very lengthy brewing process. And you can, if you look at the brewery, if you look at pictures of the brewery, they have got rows and rows of this stuff just fermenting in wooden casks. And to me, it's the exact opposite of macro brewing. It's basically having a care about what you're brewing, and obviously this isn't as brewed on a massive scale, but it's one of them beers that I love the brewing process, I love the history of it, and I actually like the flavour of it. So, with that in mind, let's shut up and let's get this open. Right, before we do, we should really tell you what this is all about. This is 6.7%. These are normally high in ABV, these Gueuze beers. It's 375 ml. It is ingredients: water, barley, malt, wheat and hops. Wheat is a big thing in these Gueuze beers. In fact, I don't think there's one that doesn't contain it. And I think these beers contain 30% wheat. That's how big it is in the grain bill. But yeah, 375 ml. I'll just show you on here, if I can get this into focus. Right, that is a protected status because, again, as I say, the 15-kilometre region of it's called the Belgian land, and it's a region around Brussels. But if you want to get that mark on there, not this one, I'll go into that in a sec, this one here, and this one here on the front as well, then you need to be in that Belgian land, which is in the Seine Valley. Now, this brewery is part of the John Martin group, and they are famous for their stouts, and they actually brewed Guinness over in Belgium. And Timmermans do a Guinness blend, and it contains Irish stout, it contains Belgian stout, and it contains West Indies porter. And I'm going to make it my mission to try and get hold of some of that, because that looks amazing. So watch this space. I'm going to try and hunt that down. Anyway, these beers are good for ages. If you look at the sell-by date on this is the 31st of the 12th, 2041. That's how long this stuff will last, which again, it just amazes me because it's bottle conditioned. This does contain sediment. Now, they do make a point of saying not to pour the sediment in here. However, you know me, always get the sediment in there. Now, as you can see, it's got a cork on the top. Got to be careful opening these. These are lively beers, and that cork can go flying off. So again, you have to be really careful. And it's recommended to pour in one motion. So this is going to be a mission. Let's get it open and let's see if I don't fucking cover myself in this stuff. Right, I'm going to show my ignorance here because I'm not used to opening wine bottles. Oh, this is fucking lively and it's going to go pop. Told ya. I don't like them. I don't like wine bottles because they've got corks in them. And corks are fucking unpredictable. and they go bang. And I don't like fucking loud noises. Oh, it smells lovely. Lovely and sour. Right, let's see if we can get this. And here's an indication of how lively it is. You have to pour it slowly and try and avoid that sediment. There's rumours that you should actually throw a bit out first. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to waste any of this. God, the aroma that's coming from here is huge. Sour apple. That's what I'm getting. Very, very sour. And it's almost like a West Country cider. Now, I don't think that head's going to last long. Because the chemicals in, not the chemicals, the chemical reaction of what it produces doesn't coat the bubbles as it would a beer. Can you see the amount of carbonation in that? That is lively as hell. It is very, very cloudy indeed. But it's clearing, would you believe? I sound like the fucking weatherman now, don't I? Aroma. Lovely. As I say, if you're not into sour beers, bugger off now, because this is as sour as it comes. But it's sweet. Sweet and sour. And no, it's not Chinese. There's a sweetness to it, but there is a sourness to it as well. And it smells quite rustic. And what do I mean by rustic? Well, it's like apple and grape, but with a huge sour tinge to both of them. And that's really all I can describe it as. Like a very sour apple, sour sherbet, and that's it really. There is a maltiness to it as well. I am getting some malt on there. And by the way, there are hops in here. I don't know what the hops are, but they're very, very old hops. And the reason they use old hops, and they age the hops even, is because there's no bitterness in this. You don't want them alpha acids in this beer because you don't want to take anything away from that sourness. And that's what you're getting. Huge sourness. Now, if this was a normal beer, you would say this is off badly. But with a Gueuze, it smells absolutely amazing. There is a slight vinegar tinge to it, but it's very, very subtle. It's not big on here at all. And I am getting more of that wheat as well. If you can imagine, I'm trying to describe almost like a shredded wheat, but not as toasted. I mean, that's a fucking pathetic analogy, but that is what it does smell like. There's a slight earthiness to it too. Anyway, enough about the aroma. Let's see what the flavour's like. Bottoms up. Cool. Oh. That is effing sour. It's almost like wine. That is really tangy and sharp, like you would expect on a, I don't know, a very dry white wine. To my palate anyway. I imagine wine drinkers would probably say that that's quite sweet. But for me personally, that is very, very, very sharp and dry. But it's nice. I love it. If you're a fan of the West Country ciders, you know, the sharp, strong, dry West Country ciders, you're going to like that. It's not identical to it. I think the ciders are a bit more rough around the edges and there's much more emphasis on the apples, obviously, because that's what it's brewed with, or that's the main ingredient of cider, isn't it? Unless you're talking about fucking Scrumpy Jack, not Scrumpy Jack, what do they call it? Diamond White, is it White Lightning? Three Hammers, have you heard of that one? Oh, fucking hell, horrendous fucking ciders they are. This, on the other hand, is really nice. I do like this. It's weird, and I remember the first time I ever tried a Gueuze, and that was actually in Brussels. or a suburb of Brussels actually, when I was over there years ago. And a mate of mine, Pete, if you're watching, how you doing, mate? He's from the Brussels region originally, and he said, have you ever tried Gueuze? I didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. He said, try some of this, it will blow your mind. And I drank it. My initial reaction was, this is disgusting, I want to spit it out. And then as it went down, the finish was absolutely gorgeous, and I remember thinking, wow, I've never drank a beer like that where on the palate it really isn't nice at all. And I imagine it's the bitterness and the sourness that I wasn't used to back then. I'd never had a sour beer before. I'm talking about, this would have been 2014, 2015, something like that. But I'd never had a sour beer. Obviously, I didn't know what to make of it. The initial reaction, as I say, was to spit it out because I really didn't like it at all. But then the finish, it was quite sweet and very moorish. And I drank a whole pint of it. Well, I drank 2 half pints of it. And I vowed then that, if I was ever over in Brussels again, to try a Gueuze. And that's where he introduced me to Kriek beer. And that was it for me. Kriek is my favourite, as I say. It's my favourite Lanbic. And it's brewed in a similar way, with the wild fermentation, and there is that sourness on it. And I love sour cherries. That flavour really does it for me. Might not be for everyone, as I say. This is a bit of a quirky beer. You have to like sourness on a beer. Very rarely, I mean, certainly if you're a traditionalist, sour beer is an off flavour. It's a bad pint basically. But on this, it really does work. And again, very dry, sherbet type sourness and sharpness. Apple as well, that's what I'm getting. Now, apple isn't really the main ingredient in this. It's just basically these strains of yeast. Now, this is a big thing in Belgian beer. Yeast is what gives Belgian beer its flavour. If you try your triples and your blondes, you're looking at the clove esters, you're looking at the white pepper, that type of flavour from the yeasts, and they're a huge part of Belgian beer. And it's the same for this as well. You've obviously got your normal brewing yeast, but then you've also got your spontaneous yeast as well, which gives this beer its unique sourness. And yeah, if in Germany, if hops are the main thing for German beer, then yeast for Belgian beer is the main ingredient, or the most dominant ingredient, I should say. But I like this. This is a good beer. In a blindfold test, I guarantee you, in a blindfold test, if I tried this on my mates, they'd all say that was a cider. A very, very dry cider. It's not, obviously. It's there isn't an apple in it. But that sourness that you get in cider, that again comes from, I think, spontaneous yeast, or certainly the chemicals that spontaneous yeast produce. And apple, of course, is quite a sour flavour anyway. So you've got 2 of them factors in there. And as I say, that's what it's putting me in mind of. That's the nearest I can describe it for you if you've never tried a Gueuze. I urge you to try it if you've not tried it before. Again, if you're not a fan of sour beers, then don't try it. But I love my sour beers. I always have done. I think it's a unique flavour in beer. But to be honest, I'm not a massive fan of cider. I rarely drink cider. That's lovely. That's really nice. I do like that. But they're the main flavours. The sourness from the sort of lactobacillus, the very, very subtle vinegar that you get on this. Apple as well, but even though there's no apples in there, that's what it's put. Maybe that's subliminal messaging coming back from when I used to, on the odd occasion when I used to drink cider. As I say, I really drink it now. But there's almost a wine quality to it as well. If my views on wine.
No, 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 not this fucking time. No fucking way, no fucking way, no fucking way, no fucking way. You made me look a right cunt.
But if you ever cooked with wine, white wine, and you poured it in, and the alcohol is being burnt off, and the wine is reducing, you do get that, what I perceive to be like a sour citrus aroma. Obviously that's the grape, and grape does have a, unless you've got sweet grapes of course, but if you've ever had sour grapes, who's never had sour grapes? Fucking every West Ham game I've had fucking sour grapes that we've lost. But that's what it's putting me in mind of. Sour citrus fruit. That's the big thing that you get from this. Lactobacillus, whatever you want to call it. Sherbet, you know, it's all there. Anything that's sour is in here. Even sour yogurt, you get that sort of flavour from it as well. It's a very, very lively beer as well. Coarse carbonation, aggressive carbonation. In a beer, I wouldn't like that. But again, this is where you get the sort of crossover between cider and wine. That's probably the perfect way of describing the flavour, even though there are no elements of grape in there, there are no elements of apple in there. When I say elements of it, I mean in the actual ingredients. There's none of that fruit in there. This is all done through the yeast and the various strains of yeast. And to me, that is a brewing marvel, and I really like it. It won't be like any beer you've ever tried unless it's been an off pint, and it would have to be fucking very off to taste like that. But this tastes great, and I love it. So what is the verdict on Timmermans' Oude Gueuze? Very nice indeed. I mean, I've reviewed quite a few of the Lanbics, Belgian Lanbics on the channel. Usually that was when the channel first started out, and this is the first Lanbic I've had. When I say Lanbic, I don't mean a Lambic creek. This is the first Lanbic I've had in a long time, maybe 2 years, and it's just as I remember it. Very nice, very sharp, very dry, very sour. As I say, a mix between white wine and cider. That's the only way I can describe it, but it is a beer, and it contains none of the elements that cider and wine have, but they've managed to come up with it in the form of a beer, and I like it. And this has been, as you can see on there, I don't know whether autofocus is going to pick that up. It will if I fucking do a little bit of jiggery pokery here. That's won a World Beer Award for the best sour beer, and I can see why. They don't come much sourer. Is that a word? They don't come much sourer than that. Very, very good example of a Lambic. Now, there are better Lambics out there. You can pay a hell of a lot of money for Lambics. Now, look, if you've got a sell-by date of 2041, I'll be fucking dead in 2041. I'll get more or less guarantee it. The way I'm drinking now, the lifestyle that I lead, I won't be around in 2041. So I'm not leaving this to mature. I'm drinking this now. But you can mature Lambics, and you know this was brewed in 2018. So I'd love to see what a 20 or 30 year old Gueuze would taste like. I imagine it'd be not as sharp. I imagine the edges would be a little bit rounded off on there. I imagine again, it's like a wine or a malt whiskey, a single malt whiskey. The longer you mature it, the nicer it's going to taste. And even beer as well. Some of them vintage ales, the Fuller's vintage ale. If you let that mature, then that's going to take on a different flavour profile from when it was originally brewed. So yeah, I mean, you'd pay through the fucking nose. And I'm not going to review them kind of beers on the channel. I'm not buying a £30 beer just to be pretentious and say, oh, look at me, I'm drinking a 30-year-old Gueuze, because none of you lot out there are going to be buying it. So what is the point? That's just a pure fucking indulgence that I don't want to engage in. I want to keep it as real as possible on this channel. I don't like flim-flam, I don't like bullshit, and I don't like bullshitters. So yeah, that's why I'm not going to be reviewing Cantillon. They do some fucking expensive Gueuze. And yeah, you can pay up to 20 or 30 quid a bottle. And I ain't doing that, especially not in this day and age. I mean, who's going to do that? Who's going to pay that amount of money for just a single bottle of beer? To be fair, it's like 750ml, but that's not the point. 30 quid, nah, not worth it. I can get 12 bottles of Augustiner or maybe even more if I get me mate to bring them over from Germany and pay them. But yeah, it's not really going to happen on this channel. If you want that, go to Beer Hooligans channel. He's into all that barrel-aged IPA Belgian nonsense that costs about 15 or 20 quid. not the sort of thing I'm going to review on a channel. I think the most expensive you're going to get on this channel is the Fuller's Vintage Ale. But there you go. I digress. I'm going to give that a 9.5 out of 10. I'm knocking the half mark off because I know this won't be for everyone. This is a very, very niche beer. Not a lot of people like that sour flavour. If you told them it was a cider, they'd probably lap it up. But if you told them this is a beer and they drink it, they'll spit it out. Psychosemantics. I found that out as well when I drank this. They told me it was beer. My initial reaction was to spit it out, and then as I've gradually got used to it and the finish was very nice, you know, you get into it, and I love it now. Sour beers. I love sour beers. It's a big thing for me. It may not be for you, but if you do like your sour beers, I urge you to try some of this Timmerman stuff. This is probably the best you're going to get that's affordable. They're doing it in Morrison's now. I think it's $4.75. Again, that is quite expensive for a 375ml, but I think the style should be brought to people's attention, and I think this is a perfect example of that style. Hence the reason I spent that amount of money on this beer. So there you go, 9.5 out of 10. Definitely recommended. And remember, beer is working class champagne.